Hey, before we get to the podcast, we want to share with you an exciting new way you can help support the podcast.
Yes, we have finally opened a Patreon account. Go to patreon.com/2njb to check it out.
We have 4 different tiers, and they each allow you to support the podcast at a different level, and you get really cool rewards. So go to patreon.com/2njb and help us continue putting out great content for you.
Thank you, guys.
When you think about Tel Aviv, what's the first thing that comes to mind? The beautiful beaches, Rothschild Boulevard, the luxurious Neve Tzedek neighborhood, all of the above? It's hard to imagine, but until not too long ago, Tel Aviv wasn't the trendy, touristy, attractive city that it's become. It took a lot of work to make it what it is today. So, how did it happen? Today we have with us just the man who can tell us the story of Tel Aviv. A man who's responsible in large part for Tel Aviv's worldwide reputation. Eytan Schcwartz is the former CEO of Ir Olam, a Tel Aviv Municipal company responsible for Tel Aviv's international PR. Eitan was also the head of Tel Aviv's communications division, a role from which he just recently stepped down. And we are super thrilled to be joined by Eytan Schwartz today to talk about Tel Aviv's secret, its stories, and its people. Thank you so much for joining us, Eitan.
Hey.
How are you?
Hi, how are you?
Doing good, doing good.
How many Eitans have you had on the show, Eitan?
I think
We had one, Professor Eitan.
that's right. No,
No,
Eitan,
the COVID guy with
the oncologist from Sheba.
Yeah, he was fired because
Oncogeneticist.
Okay.
Eitan.
I always see him at the Gordon swimming pool.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So we're looking here. When I stepped in, I asked you if you're enjoying the view, because the view from Nora's apartment is just beautiful. You see all of Tel Aviv. 20, 30 years ago, it didn't look like this. Did you have any idea that, was this a vision that existed? Did people dream of this, or?
So yes, we're talking about the amazing skyline that we can see here, and it was definitely a vision. It was not my vision. It was a vision of the mayor, and it was a vision of the planning department that, if you will, saw the urban development of the city as a small city to a global city. And we definitely have to give credit to the planning in the city of Tel Aviv, which is probably unparalleled in Israel. They set a vision and they carried it out. And there's long-term planning in Tel Aviv, which unfortunately doesn't exist in most public or governmental agencies in Israel. Yes, my job in that was over the past decade, my team and I, to take this amazing city, which transformed from a small city to an unbelievable small metropolis, and spread the word around the world, and to bring value from those marketing efforts to the city. So the most clear value in most cities when you talk about it has to do with economic development, more foreign or outside money coming into the city. In the case of Tel Aviv, there's also, I would say, a national patriotic goal, which is the brand name of Tel Aviv serves Israel's public diplomacy efforts. So we were really a pillar in how Israel told its story around the world, and that transcends economic interests.
Some people call it pink washing, right? Whenever you bring up the liberal kind of atmosphere that Tel Aviv has, or the gay pride, and they say you're pink washing the occupation and all the horrible things that Israel does. But Tel Aviv really has this like amazing brand of liberalism that kind of radiates outward, right? Everybody sees Tel Aviv as this amazing liberal city.
Yes, and I'll refer to that and say the following, which is, I would say, very sad for me to admit as a Zionist, as an Israeli, but it was one of the biggest opportunities that we managed to seize. And it's the following, and try to understand this. As Israel's image deteriorated, the miracle of Tel Aviv was more impressive. Okay, It is easy to have gay pride parades in Pittsburgh. Therefore, it's not impressive that there's a big gay pride parade in Pittsburgh. I assume there is one. To have one in the Middle East is impressive. So the story of Tel Aviv is really built on that dissonance, if you will, on that contrast, on that tension, where in the heart of this region, which we perceive to be conservative,
Villa in the jungle.
We, as Ehud Barak said it, which we perceive to be very religious, which we perceive to be conservative, there is this oasis of pluralism and liberalism and tolerance. So the more Israel went, presumably, in one direction, Tel Aviv's achievement was more impressive. And that story was a story that we managed to tell time and time again. And we must say, we're first and foremost Zionists and patriots, and we serve Israel. We don't see Tel Aviv as removed from Israel, but as a part of the Israeli mosaic. And the irony is that as Israeli governments went more to the right, they gave us more budgets to promote ourselves. So the most favorable governments towards Tel Aviv in terms of using Tel Aviv as a brand for Israel were the right-wing conservative governments. They recognized the power of what Tel Aviv manifests to the world.
So I do want to go back and have you kind of give us a rundown or the story of Tel Aviv, maybe from, even the beginning. But just on that, it does kind of sound like a pinkwashing effort, right? I mean, because it's the most conservative right-wing governments that are, in favor of annexation or occupation or whatever, that are kind of using Tel Aviv as a tool. Or is that cynicism, or do you think that that's actually a thing?
I don't think it was in the minds of the people that allocated funds and supported what we were doing. They saw that there was a brand here, a sub-brand that is successful. So you have, for instance, in the commercial world, you have brands like Nike, and then Nike Air, a sub-brand, might be even more successful than the mother brand. That sometimes happens. And that the case of Tel Aviv, like other sub-Israeli brands, they are very, very popular and famous among audiences abroad, and let us continue promoting that. We see ourselves as Israelis. We see Israel as a mosaic. We represent one stone of that mosaic. And the fact that we got the government support was fantastic. Hey, it's our money. So why not, if we can have a share of that to promote Tel Aviv abroad, fantastic. So Tel Aviv begins in 1909. One of the biggest miracles of the Jewish world. And people don't always recognize this. Late 19th century, Jaffa is the most important city in the region. It grows, it's overpopulated, it's overcrowded, and people start leaving Jaffa. When they have money, they start setting up farming communities or they go to other places. The ethos back then of the first pioneers was socialism, manual labor. That is the ethos of most of the pioneers coming to this part of the world in the late 19th century. And then in the early 20th century, a group of 66 Jewish families from Jaffa get together. They buy a plot of land north of Jaffa on the bare sand dunes, and they say, we are now forming the New York of the land of Israel. And the exact spot where they did that, Rothschild at the corner of Herzl, was and remains to this day the center of the city, which is pretty unique because usually the city is founded in one place and then develops. No, the center of the city from day one remains the same spot. They created several revolutions in our nation's history. The most important one, they said, we are a nation. We will one day have a national homeland. This is 40 years before the establishment of Israel, 1909. So if we are a nation and we will have a national homeland, we need a national language. And therefore they took upon themselves to speak from that day on only the Hebrew language, which none of them spoke. They learned it, they studied it, but it wasn't their mother tongue for any of the people living back then. And essentially the miracle of taking a language which was extinct and reviving it, this was an unparalleled achievement in human history, not in Jewish history, in human history that never before happened and it didn't happen since. When we tell people coming from abroad, you know what Latin is. So imagine a community in Europe saying, now we will speak Latin, and it will be the only language allowed in the public sphere. And then they begin speaking it, and then 100 years later, 9 million people speak Latin as their national language. Then people understand what an amazing miracle took place in this city. And it began here in Tel Aviv, and it spread to the other moshavot and the kibbutzim and so on. And today, 9 million Israelis speak it. The Jews speak it as their first language. The Arabs speak it as their second language.
I had no idea that the revival of the Hebrew language started in Tel Aviv.
Absolutely.
Ben Yehuda was here at that time?
No.
Or he was...
So Ben Yehuda was in Jerusalem, and he lived, I would say, a decade or two before. So his experiment was a miraculous one, but it was essentially contained within the confinements of his home. Now, throughout Europe, you had these associations of
geeks.
Jews. What?
The Hebrew geeks of the period.
There were Hebrew geeks, and there were also Hebrew geeks throughout Europe. People that, young revolutionaries that decided to speak Hebrew among themselves. But as a language that unified a society, Tel Aviv was the first. And Tel Aviv, since it had the establishment of the first Hebrew-speaking gymnasium, Herzliya, which a high school that exists to this day, and then theaters and newspapers and everything that sprung up in the city. So every new form and every new word was a celebration. So if somebody wrote prose or a poem, they would read it in Herzliya, Gymnasia Herzliya, the Hebrew gymnasium, and this celebration of the Hebrew language was something that started here. Tel Aviv was a college town from day one because Jews from throughout Europe sent their kids here to be educated in the gymnasium, so that in the first days of the city, about 1/3 of the residents were young kids, mainly from Europe, boarding among other people. So this feel of young, energetic Tel Aviv is there from day one.
That's amazing.
And just to emphasize this point, because I think many people overlook it, the land was bought legally from Arabs.
So the name of the plot was Kerem Jibali. It was bought from the landowners that were Turkish. It must be understood that at the time, a lot of the landowners in the Ottoman Empire were essentially Turkish landowners that lived probably in what is today Turkey, and was either leased or used by locals. Tel Aviv today is much, much, much larger than the city it was when Israel was proclaimed in 1948. And it encompasses today various areas. Some of them were agricultural, some of them were empty. By the way, some of them were Arab villages that in 1948 their residents were escaped or were pushed out. We're not far from Shchunat Hatikva, which was the southern border. They had major fights in 1948 with Arab villages on the outskirts of Tel Aviv. So yes. If we go just back to history, because this is really, really important, 1948, when the state of Israel is proclaimed, 1 out of 3 Jews living in Israel lives in the city of Tel Aviv. So the importance of this city cannot be overstated. Between 1909 and 1948, 40 years, essentially, the first Hebrew city prepares the foundations for the Hebrew state. So the educational system and the welfare system and the cultural system, everything that was done in Tel Aviv essentially served as a model for the future state of Israel.
Ben-Gurion announced in Tel Aviv. Actually, I never thought about it, but yeah.
And come full circle, where did he announce the state of Israel? In the house of the first mayor, Mayor Dizengoff.
Which is right next to where the city was established, as you mentioned
So
before.
you have the same spot where the city was founded. That was the residence of the mayor. That's where that's where Israel was proclaimed and remains the cultural, economic heartbeat of the nation to this day.
Yeah.
You were born
Today has a Japanica, which is great,
and gold ice cream.
Yeah.
And it's right now being renovated, by the way, by anything but Jewish laborers, of course, because that vision of Jews actually working for their living with manual labor, that is gone. That's not...
No, my hands are too soft.
That revolution didn't succeed, so you're welcome to go to the Hall of Independence, which is being renovated to this day, and you'll hear various dialects of Chinese and Turkish and Romanian and any other language that people use here when they construct. Yes.
You were born in Tel Aviv?
No, I was born in New York City.
Oh, okay. But you did you live here as a kid?
So I moved here in 1981. It was the first Lebanese war growing up in the 80s. Tel Aviv was a different city. And
That's
Israel was a different city. Yes.
Yeah.
So coming here, really to understand the transformation of the city.
You moved to Tel Aviv?
We moved to Tel Aviv. Okay. So from living in Manhattan to living in Tel Aviv, the third day at school, so we go out in recess, and I see all the kids rushing out, and they're carrying shoe boxes and plastic bags, and I see kids tossing things into holes, and I get closer, and what they're tossing is apricot pits.
Gogoim.
Gogoim are the pits of the apricot that you collect, you dry, and then this is used as a currency among kids, and they play games with it. And this is, for me, like one over like the jungle. You said a villa in the jungle. I didn't live in a villa, but this was definitely a jungle. So I'm like, who are these kids playing with apricot pits? This is not what I signed up for. This was not New York.
They might as well have sent you to Africa.
And on the sixth day of school, it was Friday, so there's a big treat. It's movie day. So I came from a culture where everybody had several TV sets at home. 1981, United States. Here there were kids that either had black and white television sets, or some of them didn't even have television sets at all. It was a different country. So the teacher wheels in this big projector with film. Now, this is something I myself saw in historical movies. I've never seen film in my life. And she starts showing us a Walt Disney movie. I think it was Steamboat Willie, Mickey Mouse on the boat, and there's no sound. And she hangs this piece of cloth on the wall, and the kids are jumping up and down with joy.
And you're like, what is this shit?
What is going on here? What is going on? So to see the city today, it's unbelievable. The development of the city is unbelievable.
But moreover, Tel Aviv in the 80s, nobody wanted to live here. Like, it wasn't an attraction for young people. It was.
Yes. Tel Aviv's peak, if you will, was in the 1970s, and that's when you see in terms of the population, it starts declining, and in the 1980s, the city empties from young families. So essentially, if you have a family, or if you have money, the Israeli dream back then was to buy a villa or a house in the area of the Sharon region, or in the Moshavim around, or in the other cities around, and to commute in and out. So people worked here, but didn't necessarily want to live here. Or you don't raise kids in Tel Aviv was a phrase that people always said. The city was aging. You had this phenomenon of everybody had a grandparent in Tel Aviv with like a 4-room apartment, and like one grandma living there. What today is considered huge apartments. So it was growing old, dirty. Infrastructure was deteriorating. So I remember they would unite schools. There was a phenomenon where you'd have 2 schools in one neighborhood, so they'd just like take the kid from one school, put them in the next, and they'd use the school as something else. And that the reversal began in the late 90s, early 2000. And I must say, I worked for Mayor Rothschild for my entire stint in City Hall. He's been mayor for 24 years. The turnaround that he created is unbelievable. Essentially, he got a city in bankruptcy, 1998. Bankruptcy, a city that people abandoned, negative immigration. More people leave the city than join the city. And that's the turnaround. So today we're about at 450,000 residents. I think there were like 100,000 less when he came into office. So that just shows you the growth of the city.
So can you point to like a moment where Ron Huldai, or where the city started really changing, where, you know, the first, I don't know, cool cafe, or the first company that started, or first kind of migration of young people?
Shenkin Street, no?
Shenkin
in the 90s.
Yeah, in the 80s and the 90s. There's not one moment, and essentially culture was always here, and the restaurants were always here, the coffee shops were here, but it was a city of commuters. So you would come to the city to use it, abuse it, and then leave home. So think about all the people that don't live in New York City, but that use New York City. By the way, you can describe what happened in Manhattan in the same terms. A city that people with families or with kids don't want to raise them in the city. They leave to other suburbs, and then the city becomes popular again. So similar things happened to Tel Aviv. There was in the year 2000, a massive investment in infrastructure. So what we are experiencing today in the city in 2022, when you feel that the city is completely clogged and there's public works everywhere and so on. So something similar happened 20 years ago, and there was a complete reversal of the infrastructure, and the city became cleaner, nicer. All these amazing big projects were completed, and then people rediscovered the city again. And then if you think about the economic growth that has to do with what Israel has been experiencing in the past few decades, this must be said, this issue of technology companies becoming a major locomotive of our economy, this is an Israeli phenomenon. And like in all countries that are very, very technological, there's one city that attracts the startup entrepreneurial activity, and this is Tel Aviv. This happens all over the world. You might have countries with technological manufacturing and industry and R&D and so on and so forth. But the startup phenomenon, the early stage companies, when they first start, it's always in the large city, in the large creative city, and that's what happened to Tel Aviv. So these global phenomenons, these Israeli phenomenons, together with local investment, led to a miraculous kind of like alignment of the stars, where the city all of a sudden becomes significant. It wasn't a significant city on a world level before that. All of a sudden, it's a city of reference. People talk about what's happening in Tel Aviv, mainly in the field that you come from, the technology sector.
So how did you manage, like when you became the CEO of Ir Olam, how did you leverage that?
So I'll say Ir Olam is it's a municipal corporation. People don't always understand. So cities run their affairs in all kinds of methods. There are city employees, and then the city sets up corporations which are 100% owned by the city. But since they have the structure of a corporation, it's easier to do business with them, and it's usually around specific things. Now, this is a model that exists in the United States and in Europe. In many, many, many European cities or American cities, parking is run by a municipal corporation as opposed to the actual city employment. It's easier to do business that way. So this phenomenon of city-owned corporations, which are in charge of the international branding and the international economic development of the city, is something that appears in the late 90s, and where mayors start identifying that they're actually playing on a different level. It's a different game. Their competition is no longer within the nation they are in, but actually it's a global competition. So the mayor of Barcelona realized, he or she, that Barcelona isn't competing with Zaragoza on attracting jobs. It's actually competing with London on attracting global firms. So this notion of actually we have entered a new sphere and we're going to play globally, this is something that begins in the 1990s. The best model for what Tel Aviv is doing is a company called London Partners. Essentially, everybody that has a stake in the brand name of London it can be a partner of this, and it's a different type of organization. But think about it. If I show you pictures, for instance, of James Bond, and I'll ask people all over the world, who's this guy? It's James Bond. Where does he live? London. Okay, now I'll show you Prince William. Who is this guy? It's Prince William. Where does he live? London. There's actually people behind that. They have an interest in everybody around the world knowing London and wanting to either reside in London, visit London, be a student in London, invest in London, buy a company in London, put their money in a bank in London. And there's value to the brand name. This is what Tel Aviv did. And it was essentially, it must be said, the assets were there. You talked about the boulevards and the beach. We didn't do that. The boulevards are amazing because they're amazing. And the beach is amazing. We can talk about the beach later, if you will, because the beach is probably the single biggest asset of this city, in my opinion. The mayor and city establishment created these amazing assets. Our job was to see how do we identify the right markets to talk about it, and how do we bring the most value to the city, and what is the story we tell.
So how did you, maybe let's take a step back, how did you end up getting into the municipal administration, working with Ron Hulday? How did that start? Very it's been a very long stint, for 15 years. I entered City Hall actually at the moment of where people recognize this transformation. In 2009, we celebrated our centennial year. So Tel Aviv was founded in 1909. In 2009, the city wanted to celebrate 100 years. Not too many things in Israeli history have been around for 100 years. It's a very, very unique case. And I joined as the project manager for everything that was international. And what happened to the city establishment back then was, first of all, it was a fantastic year. Unbelievable scope of events and projects and community projects. But what was really, really, really cool was that the city, which 10 years before, as I said, had been renovating everything, kind of like completed all the works by 2009. So in collective memory, people say, oh yeah, the centennial year, all of a sudden we had the beachfront, which was done, and the Hatachana, and the Tel Aviv port, and the Jaffa port, and Old Jaffa, and all these projects, and the boulevards. So people don't remember all necessarily that they were renovated 3 years before or completed a year later. In collective memory, there was this fantastic year of like cutting the ribbon and everything was brand new again. What also happened to the city was that
for the first time, the city used international PR and said, let's do stuff on an international scale as well. This wasn't part of the way we thought, or a city establishment thought. And all of a sudden, the city recognized that it was actually more popular and well-known abroad than the officials knew. I managed with our team to do something which was fantastic. There's a parade in New York every year, the Salute to Israel. Every ethnic group has their parade on Fifth Avenue in New York. There are not enough Sundays in the year for all these ethnic groups in New York that have their parade. But
I figured that out when I visited New York one time, and there was a Polish heritage parade, and I was like, "What?"
No, the Polish heritage is
I'm offended.
Is a big that's a big parade. When you stumble upon the Liechtenstein heritage parade, that's when you know there's a parade for everybody.
It was enormous. They had like the firefighters Polish, union,
Yes.
and the police Polish union.
Absolutely.
I was like, "Wow,
Yeah.
who knew Poland was so big?"
They definitely. And so Israel has its national day, and synagogues, communities, Jewish schools from the tri-state area, they all prepare for this for months. And they prepare floats, and they prepare marching bands, and they prepare costumes and all kinds of stuff. And every year there's a theme. And we lobbied for the theme that year to be 100 years of Tel Aviv. And it was a success. It wasn't an obvious success. And they said, okay, that'll be the theme. So what you have for months is hundreds of congregations in the area and kids and whatever preparing. And then when you see Fifth Avenue with probably 50,000 marchers and 1 million people, spectators, celebrating Tel Aviv, we're like, wow, how did this happen? We did a fantastic project called the Tel Aviv Beach in Central Park. We created an urban beach in Central Park to celebrate, as I said, the single biggest asset of the city, which is the beach. So all of a sudden, these unbelievable punching above our weight efforts were successful, and that's when the mayor said, let's continue this. So the woman who ran the Centennial, I must give her credit. Her name is Hila Oren. She's today the CEO of the Tel Aviv Foundation. She became the CEO of Tel Aviv Global. She founded this municipal corporation, and I was one of the team members. And then years later, I became the mayor's advisor for international affairs, and then I became CEO of Tel Aviv Global. So I remained within the international affairs realm in various capacities in the city. And we really had a fantastic run, which I would say was halted at COVID. But if you remember 2019, when we hosted Eurovision, again, a fantastic miracle that has nothing to do with us. Neta Barzilai won, therefore...
Most of our listeners in the States...
They have no idea what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So
they know now because there's the Will Ferrell movie on Netflix, Eurovision.
Yeah. That's right. So we'll explain. Eurovision is
it's the most viewed television program in the world.
I think it's the most viewed entertainment. I think it's the most viewed entertainment, live entertainment. There's some kind of category. It's not as, but it's the live entertainment. It's a song contest of European countries and Israel.
And Australia.
Very, very popular. To explain to Americans, the easiest way to say is this is where ABBA was discovered. It was they were the group that represented Sweden in the 1970s, and they gained world fame since. So
when you win...
So when the country wins, they host the following year.
Unless there's a devastating war.
Like in this year in the Ukraine.
Yeah.
But that's exactly what happened. Tel Aviv was constantly seeking ways to make itself more known globally. We are a small city. We can never host the World Cup in soccer. We can never host the Olympics. We can never host large major sports events. The Eurovision is the single global event that we can host by virtue of the fact that if we win as Israelis one year, the following year it has to be in Israel. And therefore the competition is not Tel Aviv versus Vienna, Stockholm, and Paris. It's Tel Aviv versus Eilat and Jerusalem. So we won the bid as a city. We had 8 months to prepare. And then essentially in 2019, when we hosted Eurovision, it was voted the best Eurovision of the decade.
You won the bid?
We won the bid versus Jerusalem
and
Eilat. Was
there a raffle? Because I feel like if you asked me, I would if I had $1 million and I had to put it on which city would have won the bid, I would have said Tel Aviv, and I wouldn't have even blinked.
It was
no one actually thought it was going to be in Eilat or in Jerusalem.
At a point they wanted to host it, but I think the mayor of Jerusalem at the time did not really want to host it. And the city of Eilat wanted to host it, but didn't have the infrastructure.
Or the budgets.
In this case, yes. In this case, it required a huge budget from the city.
And
But-
it's a good point to explain that Tel Aviv is so rich. Like it's rich beyond belief. The municipality, right? It has, from what I know, it has billions of shekels in its bank accounts.
No. So
No?
as former spokesperson of the city, I'll put it this way. We never use the term...
I deny.
We never use the term rich. It's financially stable. And
Like
but
Israel doesn't have a nuclear power plant. We have a textile factory.
we have a budget of billions, but the budget of billions of shekels is essentially... We collect taxes and we invest in the city. It's not like there are these bank
No, but
accounts
you have
where...
assets. You have real estate assets.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely. But it's like saying...
They give revenue.
Well, no. The school right outside of this room we're sitting in is
The
fantastic. Those are our assets. Our assets are the schools, the kindergartens, the municipal buildings, the community centers, but they can't be used for anything else. We can't sell them off. Well, presumably we could sell them off to make money, and that's what the city did in the 1980s when it was essentially broke. But you can't give up these assets because then there's a turnaround and you need to build new schools.
But
Does Tel Aviv run in deficit, though?
It hasn't been running in deficit for almost 20 years.
Yeah.
But cities all over Israel run in deficit.
Yeah.
And the way our system is set up, unlike American cities, it must be understood, we have a different system where our national government is extremely powerful in many areas. And what people in America think, well, in America, what mayors are able to do, the law does not allow Israeli mayors to do. So sometimes people say, Americans, they approach the mayor, hey, how come you don't do this or that? He says, I can't. It's not my authority. It's a national authority. We don't have a local police. The police is national. We don't have a local fire department. We don't have a local...
Public transportation.
We don't have local public transportation. It's all run by the state. So now the taxes as well. There's a municipal tax. It's a property tax. Since Tel Aviv is the center of business and we see all these skyscrapers, that's where we get our money from the businesses in the city, not from the residents.
But Hitalei Hashbacha isn't going to Tel Aviv's pockets?
Everything that we give in terms of everything in terms of taxation, yes, it goes into the city, but the city has to spend it. It's not the city doesn't invest and have all these bank accounts and portfolios. I mean, they have investment portfolios, yes, but at the end of the day, the purpose of the municipality is to give services to its residents. That's actually in the Israeli law. So if the city decided now that it also wanted to open a bank and be a player in the high-tech sector, it can't. It's not within the authority of the city to do that. So the city is very stable, and the city has been running without a deficit, which is very unique in Israel. They're only about what we call the independent local authorities. There are 250 local authorities in Israel, municipalities. Less than 20 are independent, meaning less than 20 do not rely on government budgets to survive, which gives the government a very, very strong position and leverage versus these municipalities. And Tel Aviv is more independent. So yes, we have money. It's all spent on the residents, but you can see what the streets look like and the city looks like and the parks look like. That's why everybody wants to live here.
So, okay, we got to talk about...
problems.
No, we got to talk about the parade. I feel like one of the biggest... we mentioned it at the beginning. One of the biggest world-renowned brands of Tel Aviv, one of the biggest trademarks is the Gay Pride Parade that happens. And that hasn't been... I mean, it's not since the 80s and not since the 90s. I remember it from when I was a student back in 2011-12. So it's been around for at least a decade.
Yeah, it's been around for 20 years.
So tell us the story of the Gay Pride Parade, how it came about, how it became such a huge phenomenon.
It must be said that Israeli society in general underwent a major, I would say, transformation. I think, like in the rest of the world, how we treat the gay community. So the parade begins about 20 years ago by local activists, and it still is run officially by the various gay organizations, though we sponsor it. But essentially, they set the content and they run it. It was small at first. It was controversial at first. There were, in the first few years, police would come with gloves, in fear that they would have to touch the activists, all kinds of stuff like this, which seems crazy today, and it was only 20 or 25 years ago. It grew and grew. Very quickly, the city recognized the importance of this. It must be said that the ethos in general is this is a house for everyone. This is a home to all minorities, to all groups in Israeli society. So we give a lot of money, and there's a lot of allocation of funds and efforts to various causes to make minorities or minority groups feel at home in the city. The LGBTQ community, because it is so visible and is very large in the city, has become kind of like the staple of that. But the city is equally proud in what it does for
Vegans.
For for Holocaust survivors, or for undocumented refugees seeking a home in Israel. And
For Haredim?
Haredim as well. And you know what? One of the efforts I made as spokesperson was to put a focus on that. There is a large population in this city of people of various levels of religiosity. So Haredim, we know exactly who they are because their kids go to certain schools in the city or outside of the city. So you can count the number of Haredim in the city or presume a number. But the people that are not Haredim but religious of various degrees or Masorti, or they keep part of the traditions and maintain them, I would think that's a much larger population than what the stigma of Tel Aviv is. I would think much more people here go to synagogue, eat kosher, don't drive on Saturday. Then
You walk around Neve Tzedek or even Florentine, and you see a synagogue around pretty much every corner.
So there are about 400 synagogues in the city. People are amazed by that. And we are not far from, for instance, a school that I visited a couple of months ago, which is kind of like, how would I put it, a last chance school for Haredi boys.
This one?
Not this one. No.
This one is also has
yes. No, we're talking about a high school, which is really kind of like a last chance school for kids, and it's a unique school. It's funded by the city, and the heads of the Shas party that visited said, "We've never seen a facility like this in Israel." And they said that in admiration. They said that in appreciation. They said that maybe in surprise. But no, the approach in Tel Aviv is everyone is equal. Everybody deserves the best services and the best facilities and everything that the public service can give. And it doesn't matter what you believe in. And
so going back to the gay pride though, because we kind of went on a detour. How did it get to be such a big thing? Was the municipality heavily involved in making it so big?
So we were involved both in the parade itself, and we were involved in the promotion of Tel Aviv as a gay destination. And I must give credit to the people before me, because I wasn't part of this when I entered my job. This was already one of the pillars of our branding efforts or our publicity successes. The Tel Aviv as the gay as this haven for
the gay capital of the Middle East.
Yes. So, the if you will, why is this an easy story to tell? A, because it's true. There's a large gay community in this city. B, because the assets the city has are fantastic, very, 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 very easily marketable to this audience. And the disadvantages of the city are less important when it comes to this audience. I'll explain. So, the beach, the nightlife, the bar scene, the restaurant scene, the party scene, the boutique hotels,
the culture,
the shops, all of this
arts
stuff,
and the entertainment,
everything. So this is in the stigmas, the stigmatic gay couple or gay individual, male, usually we're talking about, because it's far more dominantly a young male phenomenon of tourists coming here. These are services they consume. The fact that the city is expensive is less of a concern, generally speaking, for this demographic, which tends to be more financially stable than the average in their country. These are people which travel a lot, more than the average. They are spontaneous in making their decisions. So therefore, if there is a war or a military operation, while everybody cancels and it takes 2 years for them to regain confidence, when it comes to this crowd, they're easier to bring back. So for all these reasons, Tel Aviv is a fantastic destination for them. Now, the third thing is, we talked about the reality of a gay community. We talked about the assets. And then on a branding level, on a messaging level, this goes to this basic dissonance we talked about earlier. You have this presumably conservative region, and then you have this safe haven for everybody, and kind of like what happens in Tel Aviv stays in Tel Aviv, right? And this is in the notion of people. Wow, I'm going to the Middle East, but I'm going to be in something which is kind of completely different than what I expect.
It's almost like it's like taking a risk, but not too much. It's like the people who come to Tel Aviv from all over the world wouldn't go to the Gay Pride Parade in Jerusalem, most of them, because that's like, that's where you get stabbed. But in Tel Aviv, it's like the feeling that I'm going to the Middle East to demonstrate, to kind of stand up for gay rights, but it's also safe. Story. But it's also said, no, in a good sense. It gives people that ability to kind of like get out of their comfort zone, but not like in Kabul.
So here's the thing. The Middle East, people love the Middle East because it's fun and it's energetic and people are nice and people are outgoing and hospitality and all those things. And then you're seeking to be in a place which is safe. So Tel Aviv is everything we mentioned, which is true about the Middle East, but it's also safe. This is very, very, very important for any tourist. So that plays a major role. I mean, there are, from my understanding, there are major gay scenes in other parts of the Middle East, but people might feel unsafe there. They're going to a dictatorship. They're going to a country which is not necessarily stable or not necessarily tolerant.
Might accidentally get executed.
That can happen in Israel, and that can't happen in Tel Aviv. And this is a major selling point.
There's this great reality TV show that's produced by, I hate to admit it because I don't like subsidized TV, but Khan has great content in Israel. The Israeli public television.
PBS, yeah.
Yeah, basically Israeli PBS has this great TV show called Bo Lecholiti, Come to Eat With Me.
Yeah.
They basically bring like the people that are going to create the biggest drama, right? They bring people from all sorts of like sects of Israeli society that like will conflict. And there was this one episode with a couple that I feel like is the most representative of Tel Aviv. It's this gay couple, and they're both religious. And they both put on tefillin and tzitzit every morning. And there's this scene where you see them in their Tel Aviv apartment in a high rise with a view of the skyline. They're both putting tefillin on, and they're this gay pride couple that live happily in Tel Aviv. And it's just so emblematic of what this city represents to me. So I feel like that's not that rare here.
No, it's not that rare. On the other hand, most people are probably not that, but it's a story which we have been telling for the past 15 years over and over and over again. Now let me tell you something which is really our secret sauce, and this will remain between us. And I will say something which might sound cynical at first, but it's not cynical at all. It's when you have to work with very low budgets, you really kind of like extend your ability to look at everything you have at your disposal and use it efficiently. The single most important asset for this city when it comes to our publicity, for our PR efforts, is that unlike Stockholm, Warsaw, Lisbon, which are fantastic cities and have similar aspirations, what we have in this country is we still have a bloody conflict which has been going on for the past 150 years. What this conflict produced is, that notion of dissidence, which we talked about, but also we enjoy the largest foreign correspondent community probably than any city I mentioned, and we probably have more foreign correspondents in this country, meaning in this city, than any of our competitors, quote unquote.
Because of the conflict.
So Stockholm is a fantastic city. It doesn't have news bureaus and independent reporters and people on the payroll to the extent that Tel Aviv does. What that creates is a huge opportunity to tell the story of Tel Aviv for free. And that's what we've been doing for the past 15 years. By the way, Jerusalem can do the same, but no other city can do that because they just don't have. So Washington has foreign correspondents, but Lisbon probably doesn't. The number of foreign correspondents coming through Israel, by the way, sponsored by the Israeli government, various branches of the Israeli government, we're talking about thousands of reporters a year. Thousands of reporters a year come here to write about Israel, to know Israel, and they always come to Tel Aviv. So we managed to leverage this ongoing flow of foreign correspondents to write stories about Tel Aviv for free. They
should teach this in business school. I mean, talk about making
PR
lemonades
school.
out of lemonade out of lemons.
So open any American newspaper and you'll see stories about, the 5 best shakshukas in Tel Aviv. that's because we have somebody living here that actually eats shakshuka, and Lisbon doesn't have that. And
on Tuesdays he's writing about the bombing in Gaza, and on Wednesdays he's writing about the best shakshukas.
And there's less and less of that over the past decade. There's a decline in the conflict-related news that Israel has been producing in the past decade, and that's something
we've been feeding them more shakshukas.
But it's amazing. They write about boutique hotels in Tel Aviv like they don't write in any other city in the world.
We don't have much time. I want to touch two of the most sensitive subjects. First, now it's all over the media, the housing prices. It's debatable, but many people say, young people say, I can't afford to live in Tel Aviv anymore, and they blame you're not with the municipality anymore, but they also blame the municipality, the state. How do you see this issue?
It's a very, very, very delicate issue to deal with because, as you know, one of the things that the municipality is accused of, like I spoke about before, is that when something doesn't work and we say, hey, it's not within our authority, people say, we don't believe you. You just don't want it strong enough. You don't want it hard enough. You haven't put enough effort. You don't care. And it's very hard to convince people that if something bad is happening in the city, we have very little control over it. And that's one of those issues. So is there a way to make the prices in the city be lower? If there is, we haven't found it. What the city is doing is building thousands of units of affordable housing, subsidized housing, controlled housing in various models. It must be said that Israel, in essence, does not really have those models. As a society, we do not really believe in defending renters' rights in the way you see in Europe and even in the United States. We might say we believe in it, but if you look at the legal system, Israeli law does not support that.
But let me challenge this for a second. If you walk in one of the streets of Florentine, okay? When I'm in Rome, even in the outskirts of Rome, there's no such thing as a building that's less than 10 stories, okay? And when I walk in Florentine, all the buildings are 3 stories. So you had the power to decide that this whole neighborhood is going to be skyscrapers, like in China, okay? It's not like it's not in your control. And then you'd had so many more apartments, but you don't do that. You make life, it's not you anymore, but sorry. But the municipality make life really, really hard for property owners to make a 3-story building a 10-story building.
It needs to be said, there is a building committee, right, in the municipality that approves plans.
But if the mayor wants to have a skyscraper somewhere, there will be a skyscraper. That's what I'm saying.
It's in the power of the municipality to approve building construction in certain areas.
So now, how much time do we have left to talk about this? Because by the end, if you give me 10 minutes, I'll prove you. I'll prove you not wrong, but you'll understand the other side is. Okay. So Eitan, when you came here, you drove your car. Was it easy to find parking?
Here, yeah.
Okay. If all the buildings on the street were 10 stories, would it be easy to find parking? No. Now, if all these buildings that have 3 stories now had 10 stories, meaning we would triple the population. We would need at least 1 more school and 5 more kindergartens. Right. Where would we put them? So it's easy. It's easy to say build more, but we are creating. Now, by the way, go to some of these cities around Tel Aviv that were built like Tel Aviv with these narrow streets. Mm-hmm. This neighborhood we're in now was built in the 1950s, essentially. It was a different country back then. As I said, I came to a country in 1981 where people didn't have television sets. Some of them didn't have cars. Now everybody owns 2 cars. So now what happens in a city where you say, let's triple the amount of stories? Go to some of these cities, see what's happening in these narrow streets. It's a nightmare. And these are all the stories we see on the news. People saying, I can't even leave my own neighborhood in the morning. It takes me an hour and a half just to get on the main road, let alone drive to my work, because this country was not planned in that way. What we really lack is an efficient and sufficient public transportation system. If we had a metro or a subway system like you have in the United States or in Europe that would bring people from place to place, and you would not need cars, and we would be much more crowded. Yes, that would be an ideal world, but in the meanwhile, that's not happening. Now, let me ask you another question. We're living in a place of in a residential area of Tel Aviv, Yad Eliyahu. We're speaking now in Yad Eliyahu, which for many years was lower middle class, even working class, right? And people that bought apartments here are they happy of the rise of apartment prices, or would they like their prices to go down?
I think they're happy.
They're very happy.
Yeah.
So for every person saying, hey, you have to make sure that the prices of real estate are lower, you have somebody else saying, no, I'm actually very happy with the situation.
Also, the state of Israel gets 21 billion shekels every year from taxation.
Well, but they're happy and they're not happy, because whoever has a mortgage out on their apartment in Tel Aviv, and a big part of their mortgage is tied to the consumer price index, and that mortgage is inflating, meaning that's not just like the appreciation of their property is going up, but their loan is also inflating.
No, but the prices went up way more than the loans.
True, but I'm saying they're worried. They're also worried about the fact that they owe more money.
So many people talk about rent control. I know people, we talked about the grandparents, people that essentially have a unit which they rent out, and that's their pension. Now, are you going to tell somebody who's in his 80s, actually, you know what, you don't deserve 10,000 shekels a month. We will, the rent can't be more than 4,000. But that's that person's pension. That's how they make a living, and it's been their property for their entire lives.
Yeah.
So these are very, very complex questions. At the end of the day, there is a shortage of houses in Israel. Therefore, the prices go up. There are more people that want to buy apartments in Israel than apartments in Israel.
But mainly in Tel Aviv, though,
now,
in the center.
and the demand is always highest in the most popular.
Like in Eilat, there's no...
But that's always the case.
Yeah.
It's always going to be more expensive in London than in Manchester. And it's always going to be more expensive in New York in comparison to Pittsburgh. That's always going to be the case.
Yeah.
And we are the city of London. We are the Manhattan. That's what we are. And people want to live here, and I understand that. I want to live here too. I acquired an apartment in 2002 at one of the lowest points of the Israeli real estate market, and sold that apartment 10 years later because we had to move to a new apartment. I sold it for 5 times the amount I purchased. 5 times.
And today, it would have been worth?
It would have been, of course, much more.
Yeah.
But when I moved to an apartment, that also went up 5 times. So we're living in a crazy, crazy society where we are divided not among the rich and the poor, but among those who have an apartment and those who will never have an apartment. That's really the division in Israeli society. Well, by the way, in general, if you look at some of these cities around us,
Another 10 minutes.
Go to Lod. Go to Petach Tikva.
Lod?
By the way, go to Be'er Sheva. Go to Be'er Sheva.
Okay, I'm in Be'er Sheva now.
Be'er Sheva.
You still have less. You have still affordable apartments.
You have
in Be'er Sheva.
Yes, and those apartments cost 1/10 of what they cost 10 times the amount they costed 20 years ago.
Yeah, look at Bet Shan. Bet Shan is going to be, I think, is a great investment, right? They're building. There's the train that's going to be going to Haifa. Haifa is growing.
There is a train,
right? Already, yeah. Sorry. So
and you buy an apartment in Bet Shan, the Pinui Binui is promised, because the first earthquake, the city will go down, and then they'll finance you a new building.
No, but in Bet Shan, you can get an apartment today for 400,000 shekels for 70 square meters. I mean, it's it's not impossible to buy.
Dimona.
It is impossible to buy in Gush Dan if you're not in the top 10% or 1%.
But you are talking as an investor, and I, as an Israeli, say having a roof is a basic human right. It's not about an investment. We all look at this as investments. You don't plan on moving to Bet Shan necessarily. You're like, okay, where can I put my money and it will yield a profit so that 10 years from now, you don't want it to remain 350,000 shekels. You're looking, okay, where can I put my 350,000 shekels now that 10 years from now will be worth $1 million, right? So you are part of the problem. You are not looking at as houses, and you represent the majority of Israelis that don't look at houses as a right for people to have a roof. For us, it's a channel of investment. This has to do with Israeli culture, and this is something.
A roof in Bet Shan is also a roof. So
absolutely.
Even if we agree that it's a basic human right, then.
But it's not a basic human right.
It's a basic human right to have a roof. Now the question is, another basic human right is you will have easy, affordable access to wherever you work.
The basic human rights, I think, should be in the hands of the government. Meaning, my freedom to live and pursue happiness is a basic human right. Meaning, if Noel tries to stop me from living, then the government should stop him from stopping me. But basic human
express yourself.
So basic human right means the government should give me an apartment.
By the way, under my beliefs, that's the truth. And by the way, the founding father of the Israeli right-wing conservative camp, Ze'ev Jabotinsky, talked about the 5 memim, the 5 things that start by the letter mem that governments must provide.
Okay.
That need. including a house. Yes, absolutely.
And clothes, by the way.
Clothing and housing and wealth and welfare
how does
and
house
healthcare.
start with mishkun?
Ma'on.
Ma'on. Okay.
That's a very nice word that means house. Yes.
Okay.
And it is a basic human right. In Israeli culture, owning your own residence is very, very important. Unlike European societies where you can rent your entire life and you don't feel you're missing out on anything. People with a lot of money don't own their apartments. They rent their apartments. For us, it's very important. Everybody should have a roof and everybody should have easy access to work. Now, if you live in Bet Shan, which, as you said, has a train, the train, if I am not mistaken,
once an hour or something.
Maybe once every 30 minutes or once an hour.
Yeah.
The trains in Israel, unfortunately, some of them are planned very poorly. So they put the station on the outskirts of the city or outside the city instead of going directly into the city, like you have.
Yeah.
So
you need a car to drive.
So you need a car to drive to the train station. The train isn't as frequent as it should be. Now,
Bet Shan, I was in Bet Shan. You can walk all of Bet Shan in like 20 minutes.
It's hot though in the summer. It's like 40 degrees.
So get a parasol.
So the question is, let's say you work in the major city being Haifa in the case of Bet Shan.
Yeah.
How easy it is to get from your house in Bet Shan to your employer in Haifa?
My father is driving to work for like 2 hours every direction for like 30 years.
Your father represents the old world, and he represents something which in America people support, but we believe in something else. We believe in public transportation. We believe in it.
You
it's
can't
not
go
happening.
to the grocery store with beliefs.
But America has a different system. America in the 20th century essentially chose car ownership as an ethos of American society. You look at the way Europe developed after World War I, mainly World War II, as we will construct public transportation systems. In Israel, at least my mayor, myself, the current Minister of Transportation, I think most people that look at this country of how small and crowded it is, there's no reason we shouldn't have a good public transportation system. There is no reason not to go from Bet Shan from door to door. Bet Shan, Haifa should be more than an hour. There's no reason for that. Israel is a tiny country. The fact that your father drives every day for 2 hours is a failure of the system. It's not the ideal. It's a failure of the system.
It's life. It's just life.
It's not life in Europe. In Europe, they have a different lifestyle.
Depends. You can have a commute of more than an hour to your workplace if you live in the suburbs.
That's true.
Yeah.
But there's still a public.
Not to mention China, Japan.
Do we want to be like China?
No. But do we want to be like Europe? I don't know.
In terms of public transportation, I think we want to be like Europe. Isn't it fun to be in Europe, to go on a subway from place to place, and it's always clean, and it's always efficient, and it's always fast,
it is.
And it's always affordable, and you don't need a car in Paris. You really don't need a car in Paris. If you live in Paris, you can live your entire life without a car. That's fantastic. Think about how much space we are clearing from the public sphere, how much contamination we are lowering, how much noise doesn't exist because so many people don't own cars. Owning a car is probably one of the most selfish things you can do. You're taking up 6 square meters of public space, which most of the time you don't really need. It's a selfish act, and people see it as a right they have from the municipality. If you bought a new refrigerator, would you expect the municipality to allow you to put it on the street and not move it? Is that a born right? Of course not. So why is it the case with another metal box called a car? Why do you
I'm with you, so let's build parking lots. But the city won't let you build in many cases parking.
Because that will increase the cars. What we should have is a public transportation system that gets you from place to place. This city is so small that you can really walk from place to place within an hour.
For the record, Eitan came here by foot.
By foot, it took me 40 minutes, and it was probably faster than what it would have taken me by car.
You came here by foot?
Yeah,
wow.
from Dizengoff. Yeah, absolutely.
By car, it would be
Where do you
faster.
work, Eitan? What area?
In the Bursa, Ramat Gan, and I live in Florentine.
So
it takes you like 40 minutes.
I could walk it in. No, it takes me in the morning 20 minutes.
No, when you come back. 30 minutes.
30 minutes.
Yeah.
35 minutes. I could walk it, in 45?
Yeah, but it's so
Maybe
hot.
an hour.
But here's the big question.
There's not enough shade in the city.
I have friends who come by bike, though, and they do it in 15, 20 minutes.
I would claim that the biggest lobby against everything I said are people like yourselves who have podcasts. Because who would listen to you if not for traffic, right?
Yeah.
So we want congestion, we want
My mother.
gyms, right?
My mother would listen.
Yeah,
to
of
me
course.
if
Your mother
not
would listen
for
to
traffic.
Of course. But if there were
I
no
listen in
traffic,
the gym.
I said if there
Yeah.
was no traffic or no gyms, you guys would be
Yeah.
out of business.
True.
Yeah.
Okay. So in a sentence, what the future holds for you?
For me personally,
Yeah.
my life is intertwined in the life of the city, and I will remain its servant forever, and this country, of course. I see this city though as the fulfillment of the Zionist dream, and I will end with one thing. This is really, really important for our Jewish listeners. The name of the city, Tel Aviv. People don't know this. When Herzl published his visionary book about the future Jewish society in the land of Israel, he called the book Alt Neuland, old, alt, new land. And he talked about this vision of a modern, progressive Jewish society. So when the people that founded this city searched a name, the name that was selected was the Hebrew translation of Alt Neuland, Tel Aviv. Tel meaning the ruins of the past, the archaeological dig of the past, and Aviv, the spring. So you have the past and the future. So essentially what the people were saying to themselves is, we are taking upon ourselves the commitment to be a fulfillment of Herzl's dream and vision. That's what we are. We will fulfill what Herzl wrote about in his book. And we're very proud of that, because we really feel that this is what the modern progressive Jewish society of self-governing Jews should look like. And we're at the service of the Jewish people in the city. And I always loved working for City Hall, and I continue to do stuff for the city in various capacities.
Amen.
Amazing. Thank you so
Amen.
much for coming. Guys, we have Patreon, so if you want to support us, go to patreon.com/twinjb. And that is it. Thank you so much for
Thank you
coming.
so
Thank you.
much,
It was a
Eytan.
pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Real pleasure.
Bye,
Bye, guys.
guys.
Next time.
Bye-bye.